My name is Tim McMullen. I'm here with Dylan Greenwood, Brad Blug, and Colin, and we're going to be going through data curation today. So one of the things that's come up, we've been talking a lot about AI and our assistants and search and how we're utilizing your existing data in these technologies. And one of the things that's came up internally for us as we did this is, your data's got to be clean. It's got to be really in the right source. And the nice thing about Grooper being an IDP platform is we've designed all these tools to clean data. It's kind of what we do. So we're going to talk about that today. So I'm going to probably take a back seat mostly today to Dylan. So, and as people are joining in, we are recording this, so you will get the follow-up after the session. We'll clean it up and then we'll send that out. Basically get rid of all my swear words that I tend to drop, and then we'll send that out. Like always, use the Q&A to ask any questions, and we'll answer those live if we can. If we don't get to them, we'll follow up with you afterwards. And without further ado, I'll introduce Dylan Greenwood. We can edit that out, right?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so the main thing we're going to be talking about today is this thing called data curation. And what data curation is all about is, in a really simplified way, changing your data, normalizing or mutating your data in such a way that it is better suited for an AI chatbot like Grooper's AI assistants. And all this comes from a lot of talk around what is referred to as a hallucination often in the media. And an AI hallucination is a real scary word, but there's really not a whole lot to it. It's just a scary term for when an LLM-based chatbot like ChatGPT, or as I think you guys have been talking about, Grooper's AI assistants, just tend to make mistakes. And they look kind of weird, which is why they are called hallucinations, where you ask it a question and it comes up with something out of left field, seemingly. And there's really just two main reasons why a base LLM will make a hallucination. We'll talk about a slight third later on. But really, it's just that the LLM either has too much data or not enough data. So large language models, which is the foundational technology underneath something like ChatGPT, are trained on large amounts of language, almost the entire internet up to a point. And in the first scenario, what can happen is there's just too much information out there. So you may ask it a question, and the LLM is comparing that question to all of its training. And it's a good thing to keep in mind that the LLM doesn't actually understand anything, right? Just takes that question, decomposes it into numerical or statistical relationship, compares it to its training data, and then just predicts one word after another what the response should be. In that process, if there's a lot of information, a lot of different competing data that it is using to predict that response, one word after another, and sometimes it can come up with really wacky sounding things. So that's problem number one, is it just has access to a lot of information. Too much in some cases. Problem number two is it just doesn't have access to the information you are talking about at all. So yeah, the internet is great. It's got a lot of stuff out there, but it doesn't have everything. So case in point, our Grooper wiki is technically not on the publicly accessible internet. Yeah, it's on the internet, but you have to log in with a username and password. And we did that because we wanted to protect our IP, basically, right? So if you want to ask ChatGPT about information that's in the Grooper wiki, you can't. Or technically, you actually get really, really old data back when it was publicly available. So that's another reason why an AI assistant might hallucinate. Either it doesn't have access to the information, it's got access for too much information, or I guess I figured out a third one while I was talking. It's got access to old information. You guys talked about retrieval augmented generation and AI assistants in some of these webinars, right?
Yep, we have. The last one, we talked quite a bit about that.
Perfect. So if you were here in the last webinar, you learned about retrieval augmented generation. And that is one of the ways that we and sort of computer science in general gets around these AI hallucinations and these limitations of large language models that cause them to produce inaccurate responses. And really, it's a data curation mechanism. All a RAG operation does is, in very generic terms, figure out what content the chatbot needs to access in order to answer the question better. So you're curating the information that is used to answer the question. So you're getting around that limitation of oh, shoot, the chatbot has access to tons and tons of information by saying, well, no, really, you just need this set of information to answer the question. And you're getting around that limitation of it just doesn't have access to the information because it's like, oh, no, we've got that over here. We've got this store of documents that you now have access to. So use this to answer the question. And that's the basic idea behind data curation. You take information that is necessary for the chatbot to respond and clean it up or provide it to the chatbot in a way that it can use it. Any questions before we go on?
None yet.
Perfect.
So let's talk a little bit about the cleanup piece, right?
Yeah. So one of the huge things about documents in general is how they were generated. Now, if you have a natively generated document, something that was created in something like Word, that is pretty easy for an IDP platform to process because all that text is machine readable. A computer can read that text. That is not all the documents out there in the world. Paper documents need to be scanned. They have to be converted to an image. And a computer or an IDP platform like Grooper isn't going to be able to process that text till it converts that image into machine readable text. Just talking about OCR. You guys know all what OCR is. The thing is, not all OCR is created equal. So one of the easiest things that you can do in terms of curating your data, cleaning it up before handing it off to a chatbot, is to get really good OCR data out of it. And Grooper is the perfect platform to do this because of our integration with Azure OCR. Azure OCR is a really good OCR technology in its own. It's in the Microsoft Azure stack, and it uses a different type of OCR mechanism from traditional OCR called a convolutional neural network. Don't really have to know too much about that other than it's just a lot better on its own than traditional OCR engines like Transom. So I got a couple examples for you real quick. Here we go. Just so you can see the results here. This is a good example of a pretty poor quality scanned document. The image quality itself is bad. The text quality is a little degraded because it's an older page. It's got handwriting. This is just hard for traditional OCR engines to recognize, as you can see in our text results here. Azure OCR does a knockout job. I didn't do any kind of image processing to this image, number one. Didn't do any kind of cleanup, any kind of IP profiling, Grooper, nothing. All I did was create a profile, an OCR profile that uses Azure OCR in the base settings, and that's it. Not a lot of work to get really good data.
So Dylan, real quick, go back to the other one and go over to the text view, because I think this is the important part of this, right? Is it's not just, and go to the text view on that one too. So this is why we're talking about this, guys, is because you have all your documents that you've had in your system for historically for however long. If Grooper OCR'd them, you're probably fine, unless we didn't do it recently. And here's why. If I pass this text to a large language model, it doesn't know the difference between those symbols and something you actually care about. So what starts happening is it can start to iterate gibberish back to you, right? It's sort of generating really just crap. So now click over to the other one. And this is why we're starting with this, because the difference here is night and day. The biggest thing we figured out by combining old and new with our Azure integration, because make no mistake, Azure doesn't do this on its own. I want to make sure we're really clear on that now I can hand this off to whatever AI I'm using, because all these AIs use text at their basis, yep, right? So
exactly.
So if I don't have clean text, I am not going to get good results. It's as simple as that. So we have a question here. Yeah, I agree, Terry. We do need to. You can send me messages out, and anybody can. Anything you'd like to see from us on a webinar, one of these 30-minute webinars, please submit your ideas, because I'm an idea guy, but I'm always open for ideas. All right. So I'm sorry to butt in there. I just wanted to make sure that's very clear. The whole reason we're excited about all this is because your data, your documents that are sitting out there that are dirty, that are basically, go back to that first document again really quickly. That data is invisible, okay, to your entire system. You've got maybe 5 fields on here. You've got roll number. You've got maybe you've been able to pull off what type of document it is. Maybe you have some content there, but it's not much. It's invisible completely. And any document you have like this is completely invisible, and you're not going to be able to do anything with that going forward.
Yep. Excellent point.
And yes, this is using a combination. So real quickly, go over the OCR profile so we can kind of show that really quickly, and then we'll move on. So this is using a combination of OCR. So as of 23.1, we started to combine Azure and traditional OCR. And with 24, you can actually set the traditional OCR profile. So you can tweak your traditional profile for use cases that are fringe. Right, that you have to do something a little bit different. So we're trying to give you more and more control over this, but this is absolutely, we combined the two. And I think you had something you were going to show on that, don't you, Dylan, that shows the adjustment, if I get out of your way.
Yeah, just real quick. I think actually we could do a full webinar in this, but I do want to point out that, one of the benefits to Grooper, just like Tim has said, is that we basically merge the best of both worlds. We've been in this business for a long time, and we know a lot about OCR. And there are good things that traditional OCR engines do, things that something like Azure OCR cannot. So, rather than, be caught between a rock and a hard place where you got to choose one or the other, we actually have some technology that merges the best of both worlds. And I'm just going to give you a real quick taste before moving on to different data curation ideas and techniques. So this is a document that Transom probably would have done okay by itself, but Azure probably does a little bit better in some cases. But there are situations where, one's good and one's bad, right? Real quick in the diagnostics here, I just want to point out a slight taste of how we're merging these two results. If you see this result here, I think it's actually this one.
Yeah, it's the words.
This is what Azure gives back. This is Grooper visualizing exactly what Azure gives back to you. Notice that it misses stuff like these zeros in here. And if we dug a little deeper, we would find, yep, there we go. It has some inaccuracies in the actual numerical data too. Real data dense documents with high amounts of numerical information, Azure doesn't do as good a job. It just doesn't. We have found ways to identify those situations and take results from Transom and merge them with Azure results so you get a synthesized complete whole that is more accurate than the two alone. And so this is an example, very, very succinctly, where we did just that in those two scenarios I showed you. So long story short, text chatbots, LLMs, Grooper's AI assistants need text data to produce results. The cleaner your text data is, the better your results are going to be. How do you get good, clean data? Grooper's Azure OCR integration. Now, that's one thing if you're dealing with image-based documents or scanned documents. Maybe you're not, and maybe you are dealing with just digital documents or, OCR really isn't that big of a deal. That's okay. That doesn't mean there's not data curation that you can do to affect a better outcome in your AI assistant. And one of the resources of information that you might be pulling as, kind of the knowledge base for your AI assistant could be websites. You guys did that last time, right? You imported some information from websites and hooked up a chatbot to it.
Yeah, I think I showed me pulling in my Tinker website. Yeah. So yeah.
So what you may not have seen
I did not show this part of it.
all the cleanup that happened. So this is actually what those documents looked like before the cleanup. I mean, these are websites. We all know what websites look like when we look at them like this, right? What we're not as used to looking at is the actual HTML that is used to build that website. And there is a ton of junk that is not important for a chatbot to understand what is on these documents.
Matter of fact, really, it might even make it worse, right? Because there's so much of this, the script, and so much, it might confuse it as to what it needs to answer. So there's some sort of cleaning we want to go through here, right?
There's all this, CSS garbage. There's all this header detail up at the top. There's a scripting information. When you really, what you're trying to find is somewhere down towards the bottom of this whole junk where you're actually got a body of text. So realizing that websites are a good source of information for something like an AI assistant, I wanted to go a little bit further than just taking what we get from a web scrape and format it. So as you'll see, this is what actually ended up being used for the chatbot. And even just going from a look into, I think it was this page, a look at the visual view of the web page and how we cleaned it up, we got rid of a lot of the junk. As you can see, we got mostly just the text content of the page here. in terms of, all of these, links for navigation and this banner information up here, all this garbage that really isn't important. It's not semantic, meaningful information. We got rid of it. We also got rid of not 100%, but all of the just kind of random HTML elements that are for formatting or for
all the script,
scripting,
all the header and
junk.
footer. Yeah, anything that's not content, right? What we're really trying to do here is curate the stuff that I would want to feed to a knowledge assistant to give me real information back. And it surely doesn't need to be the banner.
Right. And we keep links because those tend to be important for chatbot, especially if you want it to respond with links. But a lot of that extra junk is gone. And we do that. We're not going to show you exactly how to configure this because, quite frankly, I think we're pressed for time already. But we do that with a series of new commands called a condition HTML. So this has, everything you need to use to clean up these web pages. If you know a little bit about HTML, you'll be able to do this very, very effectively. So the body selector is kind of the main piece. It is just a mechanism of using a CSS selector to select what is the true body of the text. So you can get rid of everything else. If you need to remove additional elements, you've got this removal selector that will help you remove additional elements that you don't want as well. And the site URL is more for making stuff look pretty. I don't know why that link is in there. I'll get rid of it.
Probably left over from me. Yeah.
And so when you look at it like this and it's all, kind of formatted, it's got CSS rules applied to it, the site URL helps kind of make those after formatted HTML pages look pretty too. And then attribute rules and wrap rules, these are a little newer, so I'm a little bit less familiar with these properties, unfortunately. But the basic thing for you to be aware of is this condition HTML command can be used to take stuff like this to stuff like this. That's a lot easier for a chatbot to wrap its brain around, get rid of the garbage it doesn't need to be aware of, and provide it only with the text that's important. Any other questions?
Real quick, Dylan. Yeah, there's some confusion as to, because we've never talked HTML before. So just show the importer. I don't want to go down that path too much because I want to get to the other stuff that you've done, which is really cool. But what changes this, guys, is what you're seeing is we have the ability to import directly into Grooper in batches HTML. So I can point it at a website, I can give it the attributes I'm looking for, and I can bring that in directly into Grooper batches, right? So now this is our 1.0 web scraper. So, and a lot of sites you hit are going to have, the robots text to block us, but we've had really good success with it on places that are not, if you have a knowledge resource, they're not trying to keep a bot from scraping it, right? So Dylan's setting it up here. So this gives us some ability to enforce the scope so that it doesn't go crawl the entire internet. It just crawls the website you want it at. And then once you bring it in, you can see we have tools so you can clean up the HTML afterwards. So
yeah. Neat, handy tool to, basically do, at least at this point in Grooper, fairly simple web scraping. But I'm sure as Grooper evolves, as everything evolves, some more.
If you have a use case for this, you have a use case for this and say, oh, I only wish it did X, just send that to me. Give me a call. All right. We build these things to solve our own problems, and then we take them to market and realize that we need to add extra functionality. So we're pretty responsive to those kind of things. So feel free to reach out to your sales rep or to myself, and we're happy to discuss that. Okay. Sorry about that, Dylan.
Yep. Oh, no problem. No problem. That was a good thing to bring up.
And those aren't really, we should. And those aren't really crawlers, I wouldn't call them, Terry. It's just what you saw there. It's basically an import routine that we pointed at, and we give it some rules. You will get blocked by anybody that is forbidding you from crawling your page. So it's like I said, it's a good 1.0. But I've had sites that I really want to crawl, and I can't get to them. So I've had to go print them off one page at a time, which is, painful, but that could be built into a process too. So,
yep. And since we only got about 10 minutes left, I want to wrap up just telling you guys about a practical exercise that I did to implement one of these AI assistants in our organization. So we use a content management system called Application Enhancer for a lot of our accounting documents. So these are invoices, POs, that kind of thing. And we also have that information stored in some kind of accounting database structure. And I was tasked with the goal of creating an AI assistant that could be used to answer questions about that accounting database and documents in that repository. So I brought those documents into Grooper and I Azure OCR'd them and I added them to a search index so that I could search for them and then add a reference to that search index to an AI assistant. And also I hooked it up to the databases that I was just talking about as well. And I can't show you everything because these are our documents and we don't really want to show everybody all of our data and our clients' data. But I can show you a little bit of the exercises I went through to curate this data and curate what we'll know as a retrieval plan that the AI assistant executes.
Right. That's the other part here of curation, guys, is that it's not just, you got to prepare the data, but a lot of this also is making sure you're giving the right instructions and making sure it's really iterative, just like all things in Grooper, right? All things in data science. So you're going through this process of trying to figure out the right way to ask the questions. Right.
And that's exactly what I did with this AI assistant. Kind of through trial and error, I figured out the right instructions to give the AI assistant to bring back the right data. So you have kind of like the top level instructions for the AI assistant. And this is, a little general stuff, information about, what it is, how it's supposed to respond, that kind of thing. Where you really get into the meat of curating how the AI assistant selects resources, particularly when you have a situation like mine, where we have multiple resources of multiple different types. That's where retrieval instructions come in very, very handy. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I will pick out just a couple of things that were useful in getting back decent results. One is something like this. Basically what I am telling this assistant is, hey, you've got two tables. One of them has kind of top level information for invoices and returns. One of them has line items information for invoices and returns. If you need to relate line items to an invoice, well, this is basically how you do it. This is how the AI assistant knows basically to run some kind of a join statement when it is getting information that needs to be accessed from both of these tables. This may seem kind of basic, but this might be a kind of instruction that you have to give to a chatbot. In that invoices line items table, we've got some line of businesses. We've got a column that records line of business offerings. I wanted to make sure the chatbot didn't go above and beyond what I expected it to. So I restricted it to this list of line of business offerings. So it didn't make something up, long story short.
Yeah, AKA hallucination, right? That's the key here is you give this thing instructions to say, don't do this. Right. And the more you give it these guardrails, they do. And these models are getting better and better and better at following instructions. Hence, we can give it this kind of stuff. And the hallucinations or the making up of data just has happened less and less.
Exactly. And there's a lot you can do with these instructions, but there's a lot that you can do with the data sources themselves as well. One of the things that we found out when we were trying to do a different project and looking at creating an AI assistant that has access to the Grooper Wiki content is, sometimes the easiest thing to do is just update the data source itself. So, we went through this process of like, oh, well, do we want to fine tune a model to give better responses? And we did some experimentation with that and it didn't really seem to go anywhere. It's like, well, RAG really does seem to be the key. Something like an AI assistant really does seem to be the key. So what do we need to do to get better responses? Well, we are the authors of that content. So it's like, oh, well, it's doing a bad job about talking about batch processes. Let me just update the batch processes article. Easy as that, right? There are similar things that I did with this exercise as well. So kind of in iteration one, or who knows, one of the earlier iterations, we had a database table that had, I think it had numbers instead of like actual words that, had to be mapped to one or more different types of documents. So like an invoice might be number one, a return might be number two, a PO might be number three, that kind of thing, right? And I had some instructions that basically mapped that out. 1 equals invoice, 2 equals return, yada, 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 right? And that worked well enough. But, at the end of the day, I was like, man, if the database table just said invoice instead of the number one, this would solve the problem without having to put an additional instruction in there. And JW, the guy who was helping me out with a lot of the database side of this stuff, because I'm not a database expert, was like, oh, well, I can just change that in the view we're using. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, we're not actually, pulling from specific tables. I've got a view that is pulling from multiple tables to organize this data however we want. It's like, oh, that's when the light bulb went off. It's like, well, if we can do that, we can pretty well condition the data however we want. So we don't have to use numerical, assigners to these different document types. We can just use the actual word, which the chatbot understands, quote unquote, better. So that once we figured that out, that helped in a lot of different areas. And this can happen on the document side of things as well. So one thing about our CRM that we're using currently to store all these documents is, it's been around for 10, 15 years. I don't know how long we've been using it. And we did things one way for a reason, I'm sure, but it ended up causing some problems for us currently. So I'm going to show you an example of the search page, and I got the document zoomed way out so you can't see it, but this should illustrate the point. So in our accounting database, let's reload and hopefully everything will stay. Yay. In our accounting database, our invoice numbers don't actually look like this. They have the number S or the letters SIV and then a series of numbers afterwards. So in the database, the invoice number looks like that. For whatever reason, in the CRM system we use, we just use the last 5 digits of that full invoice number. And I was having a heck of a time trying to write instructions that would basically correlate these two pieces of information from two different systems. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's SIV whatever in the database, but when you try and pull up that document in Application Extender, you need to get rid of SIV and all the zeros. And it sort of worked, it sort of didn't. The much easier thing to do was to just change the index data that we have in the search index. And we did that really, really simply using data rules in Grooper. So I'm going to show you exactly what I did. I got a few here that haven't been updated, and I'll do at least, I'll go ahead and do them all. Why not? So I ran an apply rules activity on these documents with a data rule that just takes that 5-digit number and converts it to what's going to match in our database, the full invoice number. And should be that one right there. So I'm going to execute that. Hopefully this won't take too long. Oh no, I ran into an error. That's my bad. We'll try just this one here. Or I'll do it manually. You guys will get the point. So what that data rule is doing is just setting the field value basically in a kind of procedural sort of way, such that it matches this format.
Right. And then that makes it so that when we feed this information back to the assistant, it can make that correlation easily.
Exactly.
Right.
And then we, re-indexed it. And
Which
if I
happens
searched
automatically, we have the indexing here. We haven't talked much about that, but the indexing, as something changes, we're watching, the service is watching, and as anything changes, it re-indexes, right? Which updates your vector search.
Exactly.
Vector data.
So I just did it manually, but re-indexed that invoice with that new invoice number. You can see I searched for it, doesn't exist. But if I search for the normalized number that matches what's in our database, oh heck, now it's there, right? So this simple process of making sure that this piece of information matches from our two different sources solved a lot of problems, answered questions about invoices much more effectively when it had to use these two different resources, databases, and a document index. And I think I got that out in just enough time for the 30-minute mark.
We're losing a couple, so I think we're at our time. We answered all the questions. Does anybody have any other questions that they wanted to address on this? And I apologize for the short format, but we found that it keeps people's attention and it forces us to focus. So we like this format. Good. Without further ado, then, we will bring the call down. We will absolutely send out a recording for all this. Again, I always appreciate everybody's time and support on these. Thanks very much. If you have any questions, please reach out to your rep or to myself personally. Always happy to talk about Grooper. Thanks very much. Everybody have a great day and a great rest of the week.
Thanks, guys.